Welcome to the latest edition of the Pro Football Focus IDP podcast, The Nickel. I am your host, once again, Walton Spurlin, and so happy to announce that after a week's hiatus, I am joined once again by one of the most knowledgeable IDP minds out there, my IDP brother from another mother and country, Mr. Ross Miles.
How's it doing, Wally? It's good to be back, and it's nice to be back bearing good news for both of our franchises. It feels like we spent the off season bemoaning the fact that we're Rams and Lions fans, and we sort of have to put up with poor seasons. And now I would say we're both quite cautiously optimistic.
Oh, I completely agree. The Lions 3-1, Rams 3-1. We could spend an hour here, pontificating over the great starts our teams are off to, but of course that's not what people tune in for. They want that IDP stuff that we promise. But yeah, as a Lions fan, I'll take it right now. A reversal call away from being undefeated. So the Panthers this week. Who do your Rams have this week? Where I don't find my schedule.
That's a good question. I've just been dealing with the fact that we actually beat the Cowboys. I was shocked. Unfortunately I was travelling for the first half of the game, so I didn't see all of it. But the defense tightened up a lot in the second half, and we got the job done. Jared Goff continues to score points. So, oh no, I do know we're playing the Seahawks.
I looked that up. Yeah, so another.
It came to me as I was just thinking, who's gonna? Yeah, the Seahawks. So yeah, I mean the Seahawks have been off form. Obviously they got a win in week 4, but yeah, I fancy our chances to win the division, to be honest, right now. I mean, obviously we were 3-1 last season, but yeah, we should probably switch away from reveling in the success of our teams and probably let's talk about some of the bad things that came out of last week, namely the injury news.
Right, a week goes by that we don't lose some players, so we will touch on the injuries, and I think we have an interesting segment for the end of the show after we talk about each of the positions a little bit, and that's some matchup data that Ross has run and some players to keep in mind. So let's get to the injuries. We'll start in Buffalo, where unfortunately linebacker Raymond Humber suffered a broken hand against the Falcons, so he's going to have surgery on that. And it's undetermined how long he'll be out, Ross, but that's a blow for a defense that's playing well and a player that for the first time is having a chance to shine, really.
Indeed, he is the player I featured in the waiver wire article a couple of weeks ago because he's just been playing outstanding football, recording double-digit tackles in multiple games. Humber had come as a little bit of surprise. He was a bit of a journeyman and a special teamer that's now... journeyman's probably the wrong word. It's just more of a special teamer. He's still a young guy. But yeah, he's found a chance. He's been playing a lot more than he ever has done. Already he played 155 more defensive snaps than he did in all of last season. So this was the guy who had an opportunity and really seized it. So it's a bit of a blow to his fantasy owners.
Yeah, they're going to have to look elsewhere. I don't think there's anyone really on the team that's going to step up in his place. I believe Matt Milano picked up like 29 snaps. I guess Preston Brown could see a bump. He's had back-to-back double-digit tackle weeks, but nobody really to plug in there. And that also goes for Giants defensive end Olivier Vernon, who left last week's game after he was sort of iffy entering the game with an ankle injury, and apparently that flared up again, and he was unable to finish.
Yeah, I mean, Vernon's a guy who signed a big contract with the Giants a couple of seasons ago, and although he's been a solid edge rusher, I think you would potentially argue that he hasn't quite delivered to the level his contract would have asked from him. The Giants normally have a pretty effective pass rush. They've been famed for that through the years with, JPP when he was healthier, Michael Strahan, among others, Osia Minora. Vernon for me hasn't really reached that elite level that we possibly hoped. I mean, he was a fringe DL1, maybe sort of pushing into the top half, but not quite delivering. And now he's missed a half a game, and we have to wait and see if he's going to be on the field next week. I think he's definitely going to slide down rankings even if he is on the field.
Right, yeah. It would be hard pressed for him to live up to the amount of money they gave him. But yeah, and again, an ankle injury. I talk about this all the time with defensive ends, but that's a very tough injury to play through, and it looks like that's what he tried to do because you really need to be able to push off and you need that mobility. So again, nobody really on that team that you would look at and say, oh, so and so can step into his place. You got players like Kerry Wynn. He's been around a long time. He's not gonna light anybody's candle. So, if you have Vernon, you're going to want to look to another team when you look on the waiver wire to try and find someone. And we'll stay with defensive ends. Veteran Cliff Averill of the Seahawks is dealing with what's being called a serious stinger. And they're still trying to figure it out. And they said that's probably going to take a while. So I know we have here in our notes, he's probably considered more week to week. What do we make of that situation?
Yeah, it's a difficult one. Avril again, he's one of those sort of like DL2, DL3 kind of flirts between the two. On a good week, he pushes up towards the top end of the DL2 step, the rankings, in the right matchups. But in the poor ones, he'll fall down. So he's going to be a difficult guy to plug and play on a weekly basis. You're probably going to want to look to see, who is on your bench instead. I mean, within the Seahawks ranks, I think the best bet is going to have to be Frank Clark, who's already shown a little bit of form. I think that he's likely to just see an uptick in snaps rather than sort of a full role. But yeah, the other guys to look at, maybe a former Eagle, Marcus Smith, but nothing's really jumping out at me there as a definite win as a replacement for Avril. We're just gonna have to wait and see how long he's out for, and if Frank Clark can turn an increased workload into increased fantasy points.
Right, I think Clark, as you mentioned, is the best bet there. Smith is struggling to make a name for himself in the league, so yeah, maybe more snaps, more production from Clark. And if you're an Averill owner, week to week is never a good thing, and neither is injuries, in the neck area. So you might, again, get on that waiver wire. And now let's move to the secondary. And Panthers free safety Kurt Coleman is believed to have a sprained MCL, so he's definitely going to miss some time. Is there anybody there that you think will step right in, or is this a wait and see situation?
No, there is a guy. Colin Jones is the clear number three safety behind Coleman and Mike Adams. So everything we're reading and seeing is saying that Colin Jones is going to be the guy. But whether he's going to have any fantasy value, I think that's somewhat questionable. He might want to add him in one of the deeper leagues purely because he's probably going to be playing for about a month, maybe longer. But I'm not expecting him to suddenly rip up the scoreboards and start posting DB1 numbers, unfortunately.
Right, yeah, that's probably a wait and see approach. And again, if you do have the roster space, Jones is the name you're going to want to go after. Maybe see how he does this week against what would be a decent matchup with the Lions, who like to throw the ball, and kind of a resurgent running game. So we'll get a look at what Jones is possibly capable of. So again, that's a name to keep in mind. And Josh Norman, cornerback of the Redskins, he's got a rib injury. It looks like he's going to miss a couple of weeks. Anybody we should consider picking up from Washington?
Yeah, I think the guy we definitely want to grab here is going to be Quinton Dunbar. He is going to be expected to replace Norman opposite Rashad Breeland. If you do play in leagues where it's a cornerback required, you probably already know that Rashad Breeland has a decent amount of fantasy value, namely because he plays opposite of Norman. Now, what I'm expecting here is to see teams try and test Quinton Dunbar. Be very interesting to see quite how they use him, if he's going to line up in if he's going to shadow anyone or just get left on the side. Some of the receivers he's going to be facing in the coming weeks are going to be Pierre Garçon, Alshon Jeffrey, and Des Bryant. So that they're all genuine number one target men for those offenses. So it'd be very interesting to see how many targets get thrown into Dunbar's coverage, and that could make him a sneaky pickup and play for a few weeks while Norman is out.
Yep, and of course with this one, what helps, Norman's going to be out a couple of weeks. Well, lucky for the Redskins, they're on a bye in week 5, so if that's maybe only one game that he misses, but still, Dunbar does appear the name that you're going to want to pick up, and maybe depending on your cornerback situation, if it's a cornerback required league, go ahead and plug him in. In week 6 they play the 49ers, so we'll have to see how that passing game goes. But anyway, that's a good look at the Norman situation, and then I'm going to make a quick note of some players that missed games in week 4. A couple of them I touched on in last week's show. That would be Jared Davis and Jamie Collins. They're both dealing with concussion issues still. It looked like Davis was going to play. I live here in Detroit, practiced every day last week, and then was a late scratch. And that's the concussion issues I was talking about. It's just, you never know. So those are situations you always have to monitor closely.
You do, you do. I plugged Davies in and didn't get any points because I was in a car when I needed to change the lineup and couldn't get it done. Like you said, was expected to play, so you do have to monitor these concussions despite what we hear during the week.
Exactly, and a few big name linebackers that missed week 4, Levante David and Quan Alexander of the Buccaneers. And I don't think there's any guarantee, and I would say it's probably more unlikely that either one of them give it a go this week either, Ross, as they play Thursday night.
Yeah, that definitely sounds true. If I'm expecting either one to come back, I'm expecting maybe Alexander in week 6.
Yeah, a little bit of extra time to recover. And T.J. Ward, the newly acquired safety for the Bucks, also missed that game. So we'll have to see if he's able to get healthy in time for their matchup with the Patriots Thursday night. Sean Lee of the Cowboys didn't play due to a hamstring. Shaq Lawson, young defensive member of the Bills, I believe it's a groin injury that kept him out. And we're still waiting for Myles Garrett to make his debut.
Yeah, definitely some notable names missing last week.
Right, and so you know what? I'm going to use that Myles Garrett reference to segue right into our defensive lineman breakdown this week because it was his teammate Emmanuel Ogba that had a very nice week 4.
Yes, he did. He recorded 6 total tackles, also notched up a sack, 2 forced fumbles, and a fumble recovery. And this is off the back of 6 total tackles and a sack the week before. So, despite Garrett not being in the lineup, Ogba, a guy you did mention several times in the preseason, Wally, continues to shine. And for me, with Garrett back in the lineup, or due to be back up in the lineup soon, I think things are only going to be trending up for Ogba. Now, obviously, we're not saying he's going to get sacks every single week, but this. Whether he gets to double digits might be pushing a little bit too much, but I could definitely see 7 or 8 sacks out of him this season because he's going to see much better matchups when Garrett's on the field.
Exactly. So if there's anything for Browns fans to cling to at this point, it's certainly not their offense, but shaping up that they have a couple of really nice bookend defensive ends. If and when Garrett gets on the field and gets a chance to apply his trade. But as you mentioned, that can only help Ogba because he's going to draw some attention. So we'll keep an eye on what they're able to do once both of those guys get on the field. Another player, hopefully, if Khalil Mack's a defensive end in your league's designation, he's playing like Khalil Mack.
Yeah, I mean, we all know how good Khalil Mack is, and he's putting up some more big numbers as an edge rusher again this season. 7 total tackles and 2 sacks last week. He's already got 4 sacks in the season, 15 stops to his name already as well. Looking amongst other edge defenders, according to our statistics, only Justin Houston has more stops than Khalil Mack. So this is a versatile player against the run and the pass. So he is a points machine. If you're lucky, you play on a host site like ESPN, you can get him in as a defensive end.
Right. That's he's not designated that in my leagues, and he still puts up decent numbers. Even for a linebacker, above average. But yeah, if you can get him at defensive end. You're certainly loving that. Cameron Hayward had one of those days where you put up a little bit of everything. He had some tackles and then 3 big plays, so it was nice to see him step up.
Yeah, exactly. He got the it looks like a trifecta to me: a sack, forced fumble, forced recovery. One of those always does a big job on your score, and he certainly did that. Hayward for me is a very solid DE2. I like him. He's the kind of guy you can plug in and feel really confident of getting a decent tackle tone out of him each week. And if he puts up a splash play like this, he has a pretty good score at the end of the week.
Yep, not the flashiest name, but again, like you said, that's someone that just it can get you production. Again, not like this next player who was kind of a splash name coming into the season and started slow. That'd be Danielle Hunter, defensive end of the Vikings, and it took him a few weeks, but welcome back, Mr. Hunter.
Yeah, 2 sacks in this past week gone. Also added 5 total tackles. I had someone ask me on Twitter, Wally, as I'm sure you did, what's the deal with Hunter? People wanting to know when we were pushing this guy as a top five defensive end in our rankings in the preseason, he got off to a very slow start. But sometimes that's the way football goes. You can still have a pretty big season if you don't get a sack in 3 or 4 games, because we're not expecting all players to get sacks in every game. Hunter is an elite player for me. He's playing alongside or opposite even Everson Griffin, who's had a great start to the season. As teams focusing on Griffin more, it's going to free up Hunter, and so we saw this week.
Exactly. Griffin, as you mentioned, off to a great start. He's at a sack in each game of the season. He's got 5 on the season, and I think what that's doing is, he's starting to draw attention, and so that allows Hunter, who also had a nice matchup against my Lions. The Vikings defensive line just eats up the Lions, but I liked that matchup going in. But yeah, with what Griffin's doing, it can only benefit Hunter. And if and for you Griffin owners, once Hunter starts stepping forward, we'll get kind of the yo-yo effect. Maybe it'll be Hunter drawing the attention, and Griffin continues his big season. So, like the Vikings defensive line and some other players on the defensive line that we liked last week was Yannick. And I don't know if you listened to last week's show, Ross, but I actually found out how to say his last name. It's Ngakwe.
Ngakwe, oh dear, I did not say anything like that.
Neither one of us did, and they broke it down on the NFL Network, and they actually broke it down phonetically. So I wrote it down and I brought it up last week. But so it's Yannick Ngakwe, and I'll tell you what, this youngster is having him quite a season so far.
He is, he is. I'm glad I tipped him up in my waiver wire article last week, because he's had a 2 sack day. He's got 4 on the year. If you didn't listen and he's still available, grab him.
Oh yeah, he's putting up top 10 fantasy numbers right now. I mean that Jacksonville line is really something. Calais Campbell playing well. Obviously not as hot as he was in week 1, but also Dante Fowler and a couple of other hot players last week. We've got a youngster in Anthony Zettel of the Detroit Lions. He had a couple of sacks, and then veteran Julius Peppers. As I said before, he is showing you can go home again, because Old Man River is putting up some numbers.
Yeah, he's 4.5 sacks on the year now for Julius Peppers. I wouldn't have called that one if you asked me at the start of the season. That's for sure.
I know. I kind of thought it was like well, the farewell tour, that he'd play a few snaps, but he gets to go out there. The fans get to appreciate him. But tell you what, he's also somebody this week. Just real quick, plays against my Detroit Lions, who've allowed 12 sacks of Matthew Stafford. So Julius Peppers. You may think he's old, but you know what? He's still got a nose for the quarterback. So maybe he's someone that, besides the other two we mentioned, like Zettel, the youngster, he's benefiting from Ansa. Peppers is going to benefit from that matchup a little bit. All right, let's move on to the linebackers. And this first guy we're going to talk about is one of my favorites. Even though I'm not a huge Ohio State fan, I am a huge Ryan Shazier fan when he's healthy. And he's been healthy this year, Ross. And talk a little bit about how Shazier's been playing.
Yeah, wow. 11 total tackles this last week, but significantly to me, 10 of them were solo. He did lead the team, had an interception. Like I said, 10 of those tackles were solo. So if you play in a league where you reward solo tackles over assisted tackles, that was a bona fide day. And bearing in mind that the previous week, Shazier had 11 total tackles, and all of them were solo, and he also led the team that week. That's 21 solo tackles in 2 weeks out of 22 total tackles and an interception. Shazier's on a roll. I mean, he is a player that we always felt could push into really top end LB1 territory if he remained healthy. Through 4 weeks of the season, he's done that. Let's hope it keeps going for him.
That's it. I'm riding him in a few leagues, and you hit the nail on the head. As long as he's healthy, and he is healthy. And unfortunately, the flip side of that is my preseason darling, Vince Williams. Shazier's not leaving a whole lot of scraps for Vince. Vince is off to a slow start. I'm holding on to him in some leagues because we've mentioned the health of Shazier, but I was expecting a bit more from Williams, but maybe we'll see if he's able to come on. Now,
Yeah, I mean, if we want to flip across to another team in the division, they've got a pretty tasty central linebacker going on in Baltimore. So tell me why this is a guy who we need to keep an eye on still as well.
oh yeah, coming into the season, I believe most of us IDP experts, yeah, I'm doing the air quotes, or pundits, were high on this guy, and he's living up to the hype. CJ Mosley, he's just last week, 12 total tackles, 2 tackles for loss, and a forced fumble. now. He's got, 38 total tackles on the year. And I believe in the notes here, that's like the fourth in the league for linebackers. But anyway, CJ, we expected big things. And, unlike some players that, have started sort of slowly, CJ's delivering. He honestly doesn't really have a lot of competition for tackles there. So, he's eating them up. And that defense that looked pretty dominant the first 2 weeks hasn't looked nearly as much, the last 2 weeks. And I think that's just going to continue to give him opportunities to make tackles because the last two games they've fallen down by margins where teams are looking to run the ball to eat up clock, and as long as they do that, then Mosley's going to eat up tackles. And boy, this next guy he's just to me been the surprise of the early season, and that's Myles Jack, the Jacksonville Jaguars, because it looked for a while like they were just trying to figure out a place to put him, and that Paz had got his old position back. But talk a little bit about what Jack has been doing.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all appreciate Jack's talent. He was obviously touted highly when he came out. He was very highly thought of in fantasy circles for his potential. And like you said, he has started to deliver. And the only reason he was being held back was Paul Posluszny was hanging around. And, we talked about it in the preseason. It was penciled in that Posluszny was going to start. But he hasn't been. It's been Jack. And he added another 9 total tackles and a fumble recovery for touchdown this last week. So, Jack continues to shine. He's really moved up. He's definitely a top end LB2 at the minute, and the way he's playing, he's really pushing to join his teammate Telvin Smith, who had 13 total tackles last week, by the way, as an LB1.
Right, and of course that was against the Jets, and they went into overtime, so you got a few extra snaps there. But no, Jack, yeah, he's just really been playing. To me, again, above what we expected in the preseason, just because of how things were breaking down. But that's the thing; anything can happen, and that's what makes IDP so much fun. And of course, this next guy's just doing what he does. That's Luke Kuechly of the Carolina Panthers. Pretty much everyone's number one linebacker heading into the season. I believe I put Ogletree, but we're not going to hold that against me. But Kuechly, 14 total tackles, led the league. What can you say? It's what Kuechly does again when he's healthy.
Exactly, and that's the caveat. And like you said, you may have ranked someone above Kuechly, but you were taking into account the fact he has shown a tendency to get concussed. We're only 4 weeks into the season, Wally, so you could still bear fruit on your Ogletree prediction yet. But a guy I want to flag, also on the same team as Kuechly on the Panthers, is Shaq Thompson. He had 10 total tackles this last week, and now he's a guy I'm flagging up for waiver wire attention. Mainly because Thomas Davis hasn't been on the field quite as much the last 2 weeks. He's dealing with an injury. I want to say ankle, but I think I might. I'm not sure now. No, I haven't got it in front of me. But yeah, Davis has been. He only played about 40-50% of the snaps this week and about 75 the week before. So this is giving Thompson increased opportunity. It was something that we were kind of feeling might happen in the preseason anyway. Davis is 34 years old. Shaq Thompson was a first-round rookie a couple of years ago. They clearly liked him as a sideline-to-sideline backer and a replacement for Davis. So maybe this is the handing of the torch. Definitely worth grabbing. If it doesn't fully happen this season, I think it will next.
Exactly. We've kind of been waiting for the Thompson sighting, or for Thompson to play like this. I believe it was actually, wasn't he a safety coming out of college? But right away their plan was to move him to linebacker. And as you mentioned, Thomas Davis snaps are down. I wanted to look that up before the show. Yeah, last week 69 snaps for Thompson, 37 snaps for Davis. So whether it's injury related, that's always a chance. Especially Davis, that's a guy that's came back from a lot of injuries. But you can see, I think they're making a concerted effort to get. To get Thompson in there more, and it definitely paid off last week. A few other, not really household names, but had nice games that could be waiver wire options. Joe Schobert, that'd be the Browns, I believe, and
Yep. He's played every single defensive snap so far this season. I think he's worth paying a lot of attention to. He has actually recorded more tackles than a guy we talked about in the preseason on the same team as being a potential LB1 in Christian Kirksey. Kirksey just outscores him on fantasy points because of splash plays, but when you're looking at snaps and tackles, which for me are probably the best indicator of future fantasy success for linebackers, Schaubert's the guy to go with in Cleveland.
all right. And again, this next guy's a surprise to me, but the Colts are using him. and he double-digit tackles. I believe this is the second time this year that
Yeah,
he's
he
hit
looked great.
that. Yeah, John Bostic out of nowhere, or
I know.
maybe go ahead.
Yeah, I know. I'm just. It shocks me as well, Willie. Wally, sorry. I, I can't. Yeah, I feel like we're banging Bostic's name out there for the last 2 or 3 weeks, but the guy's still picking up points and he's still on the field. People haven't got him off that job yet, so if hopefully people listened in week one and they took a chance because he's still scoring now and he could continue to do so.
Right, off the trash heap and into starting lineups. I actually picked him up, and I haven't had the nerve to start him, but that's going to change because I've got some injuries on my main team. So John may actually see the field. So that just probably means he's going to get 3 assisted tackles and then get hurt. And this next guy was a surprise to me as well. We didn't really know how things were going to play out in Cincinnati when Burfict returned. Who was going to pick up or stay on the field, Nick Vigil or Vincent Ray? Well, now we have our answer, and that's Nick Vigil.
Yeah, another game with 12 total tackles. Grab him. To me, as you've just said, it looks clear. Vigil's the guy who's going to stay on the field with Burfict, so that makes him a priority pickup.
Yep, and another guy who I think want to ride while he's healthy, even though he graded out poorly, according to Pro Football Focus, against the run and in coverage last week. But we don't care where the tackles are made. The old James Anderson rule. It's just get a lot of tackles. And Jalen Smith, the youngster coming back from injury for the Cowboys, double-digit tackles and more importantly, 69 snaps, Ross.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the things we need to flag here are, Sean Lee obviously missed the game, so that probably helped him a little bit. And Hitchens is still out. I believe Hitchens is getting closer to his return. But for me, Smith's it's difficult because, like we just said, Smith is putting up production in the sense of fantasy points, but our analysts are saying that his performance is not exactly stellar, so he could well lose his job because, like you say, he's making tackles too deep down the field. So he's probably a shorter term ad, but in redraft formats. But again, there's some value in Dynasty because he is a young guy who's looking to sort of step into a role. So I wouldn't. I think I definitely prefer Schobert and definitely Vigil, but keep Smith on your radar.
Exactly, or perhaps he's a sneaky good in redraft formats, or especially I like what you talk about in Dynasty there. But you could this might be the time with, as you said, Hitchens about to come back. Maybe you see if you can't shop Smith off the back of a couple of really good games. See if maybe you got a Cowboy fan in your league, or maybe just somebody who doesn't listen to this show, but in redraft, if you can maybe get something in return, he wouldn't be a bad trade. And another guy, Corey James, linebacker for the Raiders, who, boy, poor Derek Carr just can't stay healthy, but that's not IDP related. But he had another big week.
He did. Third game in a row, playing 100% of the snaps. Yeah, James is a guy who I spent a little bit of time looking at last year. He's managed to beat up Marquel Lee to hold the rookie to hold down the job. So until he's unseated, he's the guy to ride. So yeah, if you're in a deeper league or you just need a third linebacker, I think James is a nice ad.
Yeah, that's again, the waiver wire, folks. You got to work it. Ross has an article every week at Pro Football Focus, waiver wire, IDP ads. So make sure you take a look at that. There's always good stuff there.
I was going to say, before we move on, Wally, I was going to say, look, I mean, we recommend these players week in, week out, and I actively, pick up these guys. It's not. I think that as an owner in leagues, it's not a problem to be, don't just focus on your starters. It's important to have a really strong bench as well. I'm not adverse to dropping someone who's my fourth or fifth linebacker to pick up a stronger fourth or fifth linebacker because I don't know when they're going to be required. So if those guys are out there, the Schoberts and the Vigils who we think are going to be starters moving forward, don't hesitate to grab them if you're holding on to someone who isn't playing or that kind of stuff.
Right, like both players you mentioned. If I didn't have Ryan Shazier on my long-standing IDP, and it's also a keeper league, I would drop Vince Williams right now for either one of them. But again, like I said, I'm taking the tack that I'm keeping Vince Williams, and it's strange in IDP, but sort of as my handcuff to Ryan Shazier, just because I don't trust that Shazier will stay healthy. But if you have Vince Williams and you don't have Ryan Shazier, At this point, I would go ahead and do that because, like I said, I'm not counting on Vince Williams to step up and produce until, Shazier goes down. But you make a good point to cover your bases. You need as much depth as possible. I mean, the NFL, and it trickles down to fantasy, is a game of attrition.
Exactly, and if these, I think Schobert could well post LB2 numbers now for the rest of the season. Don't let one of your opponents pick that guy up. Don't let it happen. You're giving them an LB2 by not getting him yourself. It's better on your bench than on one of their rosters against you.
Exactly, and I think we mentioned it before. It's better to be too early on the waiver wire than too late because that's why it's the waiver wire. If you jumped on someone and it doesn't pan out, well, you got him first and didn't pan out. So what? Drop him, go for somebody else, but don't hesitate and wait. That's what the waiver wire is there for. And this is somebody who I don't know if he was. We're switching to defensive backs now, so this is someone I'm not sure what his draft rate was, but if he was out on your waiver wire, you were certainly happy with the week that Micah Hyde had for the Bills.
Yeah, he grabbed a couple of interceptions. I mean, he's a player who's had a few in the past. Added 7 total tackles. Taking into account his week 1 interception as well, he's already tied his career best mark of 3 in a single season, and we're only in week 4. So, things are trending up for Micah Hyde. He's enjoying his time at the Bills.
Oh, exactly, and I looked him up as I saw him on here. And he also had 5 solo tackles in week 3, so it just shows he's getting tackles and big plays. We like that, and another player who we've always gotten big plays from, and we really got when he's healthy. Again, I have to put that into with certain players, but that's the Honey Badger, Tyrann Mathieu, and another big week.
Oh, indeed, yeah, 12 total tackles and a sack. Matthews is a player who was pushing well up into like DB1 territories as a cornerback in his first few years in the league. Obviously, his usage was exceptional in the packages the Cardinals were playing, but has suffered with injuries, and he didn't obviously get off to the hottest of starts, did he, this year?
No, I think he had only 10 total tackles for the first 3 games, but we certainly like what he put up in the last game, and even more, we're loving what his teammate Tyvon Branch has done. You talk about, plays for the Cardinals. They used to be the Phoenix Cardinals. I was going to use the rising from the ashes cliche, but Tyvon Branch is back, and he's back with a vengeance. Talk a little bit about what he was able to do last week, despite the numbers that the Honey Badger put up.
Yeah, he added 9 total tackles and a forced fumble to his already very impressive statistics on the season. Now, he's got 39 total tackles. If you remember when Wally was talking about C.J. Mosley, he added in the caveat that he's 4th in the league against linebackers. That's because I had to go back and re-edit the notes, because Tyvon Branch is actually 4th in the league in total tackles because he's got 39 of them. The only people that have more than him are Zach Brown, Jatavius Brown, and Demario Davis. So yeah, that's an incredible stat, and Tyvon Branch would have almost certainly been on your waiver wire through weeks 1 and 2. Whether he still is, I'm unsure. I've already grabbed him in every league I possibly can. Hopefully you're not in a league with me. If you are not, and he's available, he is one of the hottest people you can possibly grab, but I fear that he's probably already gone.
Right, and good for him. He's battled back from injury. It's nice to see the bounce back. Obviously, it hurts Antoine Bethea. I almost feel like you drop him if you haven't already. It's Tyvon's world, and everyone's else just living in it. Jaleel Adai, we'll talk quickly about him. He's sort of finally playing, I believe, like we thought he might a few years ago. Another guy nicked up by injuries, and maybe he's finding his stride.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so you've missed Tyvon Branch on the waiver wire. This is the next Tyvon Branch as far as tackle totals are coming. Jaleel Adai, 11 total tackles last week. This guy spends his entire time playing right up on the line of scrimmage. Do you remember Bob Sanders? If you're old enough to remember that, he's had 108 snaps this year within 8 yards of a line of scrimmage. That's over 87% of run plays against the Chargers. He is a must-add on the waiver wire this week for me. I really like the way his scoring profile is shaping up.
Oh, exactly. His tackle total has increased on a weekly basis. Obviously, 11 was very nice last week, but he's had 6 or more total tackles in 3 of the 4 games. So, and as I said, it's increasing each week. Get ahead of the curve, get him on your team. A couple other guys that we like before we start talking about some matchups for the last 10 minutes. Mo Alexander of your Rams playing really well, and Daniel Sorensen, a man I once interviewed in a former podcast life of mine, as he was heading into the draft, had a chance to interview Daniel Sorensen. But talk a little bit about Alexander and Sorensen as waiver wire ads.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at their last week performance, you're not going to be impressed. You're going to scratch your head. Morris Alexander, two total tackles last week. Daniel Sorensen, one total tackle last week. So before you spit the milk out all over your computer screen or your iPod, look, they have particular reasons why we want to grab them. Mo Alexander has the fourth most snaps within 8 yards of the line of scrimmage at 84 in the league at the minute. I said we want a die because he's played 108. Mo Alexander's not that far behind at 84. He did also rack up 16 total tackles between weeks 2 and 3, so he does have production in him. The reason these guys are on the waiver wire is because they weren't deemed to be, starters. If we knew they were studs, they'd already be drafted. Daniel Sorensen, the reason I like him, he's blitzing a lot. He leads the league in blitzes for safeties with 13. He hasn't actually had a sack yet, but he has had 2 hits and 3 hurries, which is pretty productive as a safety blitz. And he's added 14 total tackles between weeks 2 and 3, so he can put up tackle numbers as well. So if you're looking for a bit of a stab in the dark with maybe some kind of statistical angle into them rather than raw production, Alexander and Sorensen, take a second look.
Yeah, there you go. And hopefully you're listening. Well, way back when Eric Berry got hurt in week 1, we actually dropped Sorensen's name way back then. And again, I believe I mentioned if it was deeper leagues. Well, now even if it's a shallower league, you probably got somebody on your team who's not performing the way that Sorensen's going to. So go ahead and, as Ross said, go out and get him. Now we're going to move to some matchups. We got just under 10 minutes, but we're going to get to some positive matchups. And Ross has put a little research into this and is going to tee up some names for us. First, Ross, let's talk about some edge rushers that you like their matchups this week.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if you're a subscriber to the Pro Football Focus fantasy subscriptions, you can go in the back end and find points allowed by position. That's that data is really coming to a fore now. It's going to get stronger and stronger as the season goes on. It's literally how many points do people at that position score against the team on a weekly basis. So let's turn our eyes to the edge rushers, and if you're trying to look for the number one matchup this week, it is playing against the Titans, I believe. So that's the Dolphins. So I think Cameron Wake is probably the best option there. Obviously, and Ndamukong Suh may benefit. Obviously, he's rushing from the interior rather than the edge. But for me, Cameron Wake is a big one to call. I think he could have a decent week.
Yeah, and Wake again. He's actually had a sack in back-to-back games, so yeah, it's a positive matchup. And a couple of Buffalo Bills, at least one for sure. The second man we mentioned a little bit earlier, we're not sure if he'll be on the field, but the Bills have a very nice matchup against the Bengals.
They do, yeah. Obviously, the Bengals' loss of Andrew Whitworth to the Rams has not helped them protect Andy Dalton's blind side. So yeah, Jerry Hughes and Shaq Lawson, if healthy, they could have bumper days. I mean, these are guys we talked about in the preseason as well. We said we love the scheme change. We think it's going to really benefit them. And they get a chance to tee off on a team that has been letting in sacks and big points to defensive ends.
Oh yeah, I believe just last week we were talking about Emmanuel Ogbah. He was somebody that feasted against this Bengals line. They allowed 3 defensive linemen, I believe, from the Browns to get to Dalton. So that's definitely lines up in the plus column for Jerry Hughes. And then there's a couple of big name edge rushers that have positive matchups. So we touched on one of them a lot, and the first guy is playing. He's getting a chance to go against the Texans, and it's been a resurgent year for this player.
It has, yeah. Justin Houston has been playing well, but yeah, we need to be wary of the matchup with the Texans. The Texans so far this season have not been a beneficial matchup for edge rushers, so Houston gets a relative downgrade. I mean, if most formats he's going to be counted as a linebacker, so he's probably not an obvious plug and play anyway, unless you've got a high scoring league. But if he's a fringe starter for you, I think this is probably the wrong week to put him in your lineup.
Right, I think a lot of people look at that Texans team and they say, "Oh, look how many sacks they've allowed." Of course I'm going to start my edge rusher against them. Got to remember, folks, they gave up 10 sacks in the first game when Tom Savage was under center most of that game. That number has gone way down with Deshaun Watson under center. So it's a little bit of do your homework, do your research, and remember, 10 sacks allowed in one game is going to skew your season total as it goes along. So, that's something to keep in mind. And there's a couple names to touch on in the Ravens Raiders matchup.
Indeed, yeah, the Ravens have also been stingy in giving up points to edge rushers, so that's an unfortunate downgrade for Khalil Mack. And also, I think anyone who's in a deeper league and getting bought into the Mario Edwards hype. Now, I like Mario Edwards as well. I do think is an interesting prospect, but this one might prove a bit tough for him.
Right, right. Obviously, you never sit Khalil Mack. I think what you're saying is what we're all saying is just temper your expectations. This one could be a little bit of a down game, but I don't think we're suggesting sitting Mac, but again, temper the expectations, folks. Now we've got some off-ball linebackers, as we like to call them here, and I like the matchup this week for these two gentlemen. We've already touched on them once, but go ahead, Ross, and tell us why we like the Jaguars, Tyvon Smith and Myles Jack.
Yeah, I mean, well, these guys are already studs. You are definitely plugging them in and playing them. I'm just notifying you that they're going to have a bumper week against the Steelers. If you're in a league where you only start maybe one or two linebackers, so you actually have a wealth of choices. Smith has got to be your guy if you've got him, and I think Jack as well. Jack could well post LB1 numbers this week.
That's the thing about the Jaguars, folks. You want to keep an eye on both these linebackers on a weekly basis because they're the worst defense in the league against the rush. And teams notice that, and teams run the ball against them because their secondary is pretty darn good. Barry Church actually had a sack last week, I believe. But teams are going to look to run the ball against the Jaguars because they can't stop it. I think they're giving up like 165 yards per game or something on the ground, so we like them. Another matchup. Go ahead. Talk about this next one.
Yeah, so this one is difficult because the Patriots have been a great matchup and they get to play the Buccaneers this week. And obviously, as we already highlighted, Levante David and Quan Alexander, neither of them saw the field last week, and we weren't sure if they're going to see the field this week. So, caveat, both those guys, if they're on the field, potentially have bumper days. Regardless, the Patriots are a great matchup, so we want to be checking in on who's going to be playing at linebacker for the Buccaneers this coming week, and they could well be interesting 1 week waiver wire grabs.
Yeah, I believe the name I like is Kendall Beckwith. He had 9 solos last week. He's had 17 total tackles in the last 2 weeks, and to me, he's the only linebacker, unless David or Alexander somehow make their way onto the field. He's basically the only linebacker I want from there, just because he's been consistently playing, all 4 weeks. He's been on the field. I think the 9 solos is a season high. We'll see if he can build on that. But it is such a good matchup. If you can find him, get him, put him in your lineup. And a couple of Vikings bear mentioning heading into there. I believe this is a Monday night game against the Mitch Trubisky-led Chicago Bears.
Yeah, well, when it came to checking the stats, the worst 2 teams for allowing linebackers to score points, as in negative matchups, the Vikings and Bears, and they play each other, and it's on Monday night as well. So, it makes things very simple for you. If you're an owner of Eric Kendricks or Anthony Barr or even John Bostic, and you've got comparable assets in your roster, plug them and play them for Sunday's games, and leave those Monday night Bears and Vikings to wait till next week.
I know, and poor John Bostic. We just talked him up earlier in the show because he's on the Colts now, Ross, and you're throwing him back to the poor Bears.
Oh no, so I am.
Hey, that's okay. John Bostic appreciates his name being said anytime, and. Now, I don't believe people in Chicago appreciate hearing his name, but
well, they got Trevathan who's suspended, so
yeah.
Christian Jones is that who's going?
I believe he's like the last man standing. Kwiatkowski got hurt, right, and he was in there.
I mean, we're probably throwing out names that are very much fringe if it's all relevant. So they're in a negative matchup. So yeah, you're probably not going to be using any Bears linebackers come Monday night.
That's right. We're closing in on about a minute to go, so let's quickly touch on a couple of safeties we like, and one would be from the Titans, Kevin Byard, another from the Eagles, Malcolm Jenkins.
Yeah, great matchups against the Dolphins have been a good matchup, and the Cardinals have been a good matchup, so we think both those guys should have decent performances this week. And on the flip side, guys to be careful of, the Browns. So they've been a really bad matchup for opposing safeties so far this year. So Jamal Adams, although he lines up near the line of scrimmage, and although we like him as a heavy hitter rookie, you want to be careful of him this week. He also probably has the flat to deceive a little bit. And on the flip side, again, the Ravens against the Raiders turns up again. This time it's the Raiders remain having a negative matchup against the Ravens. So Carl Joseph, who has been a stud so far this year and continues to be a really good defensive back. Be careful of him this week if you have a really shallow league and you can get away with not playing him. And Reggie Nelson, if you're in a slightly deeper league, if you were thinking of plugging and playing him this week, he also needs a cautious mention.
Yeah, and boy, Jamal Adams is off to a slow start, and as you mentioned, this is not the week for him to break out of it. I wouldn't say drop him, folks, but what I would say is we are out of time for this week's show, and I will let Ross take it home.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure as always, Wally. Hopefully we'll be talking again next week in positive terms about not only our fantasy teams, but the Rams and Lions. So until then, guys, adios amigos.